All right, now that we have all of the signs, we are going to figure out what numbers go in there. So again, for this first one, I looked at 9. That told me either 2 positives or 2 negatives. I then looked at the 10. That told me 2 negatives. What choices do I have to put in that blank, in those blanks? Okay, factors of 9, numbers that when I multiply them together, I get 9. So it's either 3 and 3 or 1 and 9. Let's try putting 3 and 3 in. And like I mentioned before, you can do the whole FOIL, but the F and the L part of FOIL are always going to match. So I'm just going to do the inside, the O and the I. So the outside, I'd have x times negative 3, negative 3x. The inside, negative 3 times x is negative 3x. That would give me negative 6x, but I'm really going for negative 10x, so I cross that one out. Let's go on to our next choice, 1 and 9. So outside gives me negative 9x, inside gives me negative x, and that gives me negative 10x. So my answer is x minus 1 times x minus 9. Okay, for each one of these, please pause, try it on your own, and then come back and see me do it. Okay, again, I have 2 positives. So my choices are 3 and 3 and 1 and 9 again. If I put in 3 and 3, I get 3x plus 3x. The outside and the inside give me the 3x plus the 3x. Gives me 6x, not what I'm going for. Try 1 and 9, and again it gives me the 10x that I want. So that gives me x plus 1 times x plus 9. Okay, next 2 examples. Just a quick thing to note, be careful with your signs. They make a big difference. Now you might not think they do, because these 2 problems were really similar and their answers were really similar, but that's not always going to be the case, and you'll see that not only on the next slide, but in several of the slides to come. So let's look at this one again. If I look for signs, 24 is positive. That means I have 2 positives or 2 negatives. I look at the middle term. That tells me 2 negatives. I first of all look at negative 24. That's negative. I automatically have one of each, x plus and x minus. Now my choices for both of those would be exactly the same. Let's see when we plug them in. So if I put 1 and 24 in the blank spots for the first one, outside gives me x times negative 24. Inside gives me negative 1 times x. That gives me negative 25x, not what I want. Cross it out and we'll try the next pair. We'll put in 2 and 12. Outside gives me negative 12x. Inside gives me negative 2x. That gives me negative 14x, not quite what I want. Cross it out, move on to the next one. If I try 3 and 8, outside gives me negative 8x. Inside gives me negative 3x. That gives me negative 11x, and that's not what I want either. If I try 4 and 6, outside gives me negative 6x. Inside gives me negative 4x. That gives me negative 10x, so we've got our winner. The first one is x minus 4 times x minus 6. Now you might think the same pair would work. I mean, it should have, 4 and 6 look like they should give you 10. That's not too surprising. But let's see what happens over on this next one. If I put in 1 and 24, we should be able to guess that's not going to work, and it doesn't. Let's see what happens with 2 and 12. The outside would give me negative 12x. The inside would give me 2x. And all of a sudden, I'm in business. Negative 12x plus 2x. That does work. Now, what made this different than the example on the left? Well, in the example on the left, all the signs were the same. On the example on the right, I was taking the difference of these 2 numbers. So 12 minus 2 is going to give me 10. So my answer is x plus 2 times x minus 12. Okay, let's do a couple more of them. Okay, again, we know what our signs are going to be. The 6 is positive. That means I either have 2 positives or 2 negatives. I know it's 2 negatives by the middle term. My possibilities would be 1 and 6 or 2 and 3. Let's try the 1 and 6. That would give me negative 6x for the outside, negative 1x for the inside, which is negative 7x, not what I want. Okay, if I try the next pair, if I try 2 and 3, outside gives me negative 3x, inside gives me negative 2x. That gives me negative 5x, so I found my answer. X minus 2 times x minus 3. Now for this next one, obviously my signs are different. The second I see that negative 6 on the end, I know I have different signs. My 1 and 6 and 2 and 3, the choices are the same. If I put in 1 and 6, I'll get negative 6x plus x. That's negative 5x, so I found it on the first time. Now notice that these answers are very different, but the questions were very similar. So that's what I was referring to earlier. Be very careful with your signs. Don't just assume that you know what numbers will work. Make sure that you're checking your work. Okay, now this one might throw us a little bit of a curveball. Now it's different signs and exactly the same choices that we had before. So this is very similar, obviously, to what was on the last slide. If I put in 1 and 6, well, on the last slide I got negative 5x, and that's what I wanted, so I was good. But here I want a positive 5x. That was almost right. It's only different by the sign. So the way we fix it is we just change the signs. Instead of x plus 1, I get an x minus 1. And instead of x minus 6, I get an x plus 6. So if you ever find the middle term is exactly what you want, but the sign is wrong, just change the signs. Okay, so for this next one, I have different signs. My dog just sneezed. Okay, what are my choices for this empty spaces? Okay, 1 and 30, 2 and 15, 3 and 10, 5 and 6. If I put in 1 and 30, it's probably obvious that's not going to work, but we can check it anyway. Gives me negative 29x, not what I want at all. Try the next pair, 2 and 15. Negative 15x plus 2x. Oh, that's negative 13x. That's really close, not quite, but it's what I want except for the sign, so I just changed the signs. Now, a couple of things I want you to note. Well, first of all, we can check that. That does give me 15x for the outside, negative 2x for the inside. That gives me the 13x I want. Even though 3 and 10 might have looked tempting on that one, if you look at the choices, you have a 13x in the middle, and 3 and 10 were one of your choices. They didn't work. If the signs were different, if that had been a plus 30 on the end, they would have. But with the different signs, it didn't. So don't automatically think you know what the answer is. Make sure that you check and make sure it works. And you might need to swap your signs. So we've had to swap signs a couple times now. And we will keep swapping signs for the rest of the lecture. Okay, now in the next video, I'm just going to do 3 more examples. And the process is exactly the same, but you're just going to have to remember what you learned in lecture 22 about the greatest common factor.